This is courage. Tal Mitnick is an 18-year-old Israeli citizen, and he's refused to serve in the Israeli army in protest at the onslaught against Gaza and the oppression of the Palestinian people. Now, given the political atmosphere in Israel right now, taking that stand takes a huge amount of guts. What we've been trying to do on this channel is elevate Israeli voices who support peace and justice. Without those voices, there is no hope. Now, Israeli law dictates that other than with exemptions on religious or health or legal grounds, all young Israelis must serve and conscientious objectors face imprisonment. Now, Tal's been sentenced to 30 days in military prison, but he's been temporarily released and speaks to me before he's back behind bars. I start by asking him about that mandatory military service and his decision to become a conscientious objector.
So the Israeli society is very militarized. Yes, there's also the mandatory service that every child, when he reaches the age of 18, has to go through the process of enlisting and serving for 2 years and 8 months for men and 2 years for women in the IDF. And this mandatory service also goes into civilian society where a lot of society is centralized around the army. And coming out against the mandatory service can be scary in Israeli society, and especially today after October 7th. So I'm Tal, and I'm from Tel Aviv. I'm a part of the Mesarvot network, which is a network of conscientious objectors that oppose the mandatory draft and oppose the occupation of the Palestinian people. And we try to aid other people in coming to the decision of not enlisting in the IDF if it's from pacifist reasons or more political reasons. We do this. There are all kinds of exemptions that we support. We help get, which it could be a mental health exemption or it's called a pacifist conscientious committee. And also some of our conscientious objectors go to prison, which is what I have chosen to do.
So just tell me, when did you decide that you were going to do this?
I used to think that we're kind of just humans in this world and we don't have much, we can't really make a statement because only the people I see on TV can change. And kind of when the protest movement started against the judicial reforms, I kind of realized that we do have a voice and that people can see us. And that's when I found Mesarvot Network. And that's kind of when I started realizing that this is the right thing to do.
Is this something, can I ask, does your kind of family heritage inform this as a tradition, or in a way, is this just you came to your, I mean, as someone who's very influenced by my family, lots of people are, but others aren't. Or is this something that you just, because of the world around you, politicize you because of the events you spoke about?
So my family immigrated from the US to Israel before I was born. So both of my parents did not serve. And I grew up in a house where I was told that we should always question what people are telling us. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to come out and say that my parents told me to refuse service because that's not true. And I talk with my mom a lot, and we have discussions and we have disagreements about my opinions and her opinions. But she fully supports me in taking a stance with my opinions.
When you made the decision that you weren't going to serve, what was the kind of responses, some of the responses that you got, maybe from your peer group or wherever?
Responses were mixed. I think I've with a lot of my peers, they knew my political opinions and they kind of didn't really expect for me to serve. After conversations about the occupation and the Jewish supremacy, they kind of understood. And because they are my friends and because I know them and they know that I don't mean any violence, I don't support any massacre, and I don't support Hamas. They know that I'm doing the thing that I believe in, and they respect that.
Before I ask you about the politics of it, obviously I'm interested just in terms of, because it's a sacrifice and it's important to make that point. Just tell me about I mean, you must have had a lot of apprehension. You're a young man. Yeah, you've only just turned you're 18. You've only just become an adult, legally speaking. Going to prison is a lot. It's a big thing to have to go through. So, I mean, tell me, were you scared? And what's your experience so far being in prison? And how long is it likely that because at the moment, just explain, you're out of prison, obviously, but you're going to go back. So just tell me, what was your kind of sense, your maybe your fears, your apprehension? What's the reality being like? And how much longer are you going to be behind bars?
Mostly when conscientious objectors object, the first sentencing period is usually 7 or 10 days because the army tries to kind of show their strength and then try to make conscientious objectors come back and say, okay, I'll serve. But with me, either they knew me or something, and when the sentencing, the whatever commander sentenced me to 30 days, it was a little bit of a shock. And also getting to the actual prison was a little bit of a shock. It was very different from anything I've ever known, having to stand for 50 minutes, having to always answer with the correct names of commander or sergeant, or I mean, everything in Hebrew, obviously. And having to wear the army clothes. Yeah, so it was a pretty big shock, but I got used to it pretty quickly. And I'm not going to come and say that this is the worst experience a person could have had, because just like me, there were probably 200 other people there who are also going through this experience, and thousands of Palestinians that are going through a much worse experience of torture and beatings in the West Bank or inside Israel. So this is a sacrifice that I'm willing to take.
I mean, can you tell me, just in terms of, because obviously refusing to serve in the army, for those, you're there surrounded by soldiers who are in charge of you. I mean, what's that attitude like towards you? Is that kind of, do they express a kind of contempt towards the stance that you take it?
The other prisoners, first of all, everyone is called soldier. It's not, it's kind of, the commanders there are not the prison guards, they're the commanders. It's like a military unit. So we are all called soldiers. And the other prisoners, they didn't love my opinions, but I kind of only showed my real opinion. I peeled back like more and more layers as they got to know me more. And they also, kind of like friends from home, they realized that the things that I'm saying are not radical and are not crazy. They're just nonviolent and pro peace. And they actually not only respected my opinions, they defended me when other people talked about my opinions. The prison guards can't talk about politics; they're not allowed to. But I have a suspicion that they didn't really love my opinions.
Well, in terms of the other prisoners, can you explain why are they there? Because they're not conscientious objectors.
A lot of the other prisoners are deserters, which means that they were in a military unit, and then on when they got sent home for a little bit to rest, they just didn't come back. A lot of this is from socioeconomic reasons. Which means they need to work to help their family or take care of their baby brothers when their mom has to go out to work. So yeah, it's really heartbreaking to hear all of these stories about how they had to go back, work day and night, and then after the army kind of forced them to come forward, they get sentenced to huge amount of days. They could be deserters for 3 months, and they could be sentenced for half a year in prison. It's heartbreaking.
Before I ask you more about the politics of it, I mean, I told people in advance I was speaking to you, people were very excited. And for example, Febzi Hussein asked what the bigger picture is in Israel in terms of conscious objectors. We know there's a strong and brave movement inside Israel that says, not my name, but wondered if Tal was an isolated case, or if there are many more taking the same brave path as he did. And I'm wondering, in that context, I interviewed, as I said, Gideon Levy, who's I think a really courageous Israeli journalist. And the point he made to me is, actually, unlike previous wars, there is very, very little opposition, which kind of emphasizes the courage of you and other peace activists that I speak to, that the atmosphere is very suffocating. And actually, is it true that basically there has been very few? I mean, you're the only conscientious objector that I know who's refused to serve in this particular war. Is that true? And what do you think that says?
I think I'm the only public conscientious objector, which means that there are a lot of people that object to mandatory service to the period that you're 18, and also object to the reserve, to go back to the reserves. They get exemptions different ways, and they don't go out publicly. But there are other people except for me. I'm not the only one.
In terms of, I guess, kind of how you got to this kind of position, because it's striking in these, how throughout history occupations always corrupt the occupier. It's a very dehumanizing experience where the humanity is taken away from those who are occupied, but also it's corrosive to those who are occupiers. I always bring up the history as a Brit, what the experience in Ireland and the way the Irish people were brutally dehumanized in order to justify the huge oppression that the British inflicted on Ireland for such a huge period of time. And I'm just wondering, in terms of yourself, because you speak, I mean, you were very clear. You wanted to say, look, whatever I went through, it's not as bad as, say, what Palestinians who were detained in the West Bank go through. But what you've done there is you're talking about the humanity of Palestinians that has been stripped away so much because of the occupation, which has gone on for so long. So how have you got to that place where, I'm interested in what you think about that dehumanization, how strong it is, and how you've got to a point where you have humanized the Palestinian people in that way?
I feel like a lot of the reason for the dehumanization is because growing up in Israel, even in the liberal Tel Aviv, we don't really hear any Palestinian voices. This is because of maybe a language barrier, but also we don't hear any translated, any Palestinian history, anything. And reading stuff written by organizations that translate Palestinian voices, or directly from them writing in English or Google translated Arabic, it made me realize that there are other people and they have a plight, and they legitimately deserve to live here and to live in freedom.
I mean, on top of that, that kind of that backdrop, October 7th would always be a huge trauma for any society. I mean, for people like myself, I'd always say, clearly, you don't start the clock on October 7th. You've got to talk about decades of going back to the Nakba, the mass expulsion of the Palestinians, apartheid, as diagnosed by B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, occupation, siege of Gaza, and so on. That's true, but it doesn't stop October 7th. Obviously, that will be a huge trauma. So I'm just wondering, in that context, because a lot of people within Israel, that trauma has taken them to a place where they a large majority support the horrific onslaught against Gaza, which is obviously killing a huge number of people. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, given that context.
I think October 7th was a terrible event, a terrorist attack that was totally unjustified. And I think harming civilians is never the way to go. And I think that Hamas is not going to bring peace and is not going to bring security to the people here, not to the Palestinians and not to the Israelis. The Israeli society is traumatized, has always been traumatized, I think. And this is only making the trauma bigger and bigger. But we need to take this trauma and not let it turn into revenge. We need to take this trauma, and with the trauma, realize that the only way that we're going to get security, the only way that this is not going to happen again, and that is not holding people under siege and is ending the occupation and is giving freedom to the Palestinian people, because they're also humans. It's not that they're robots born to kill Jews.
When you see, I mean, it's also quite interesting because I know, speaking again to people like Gideon Levy, that a lot of the Israeli public aren't even seeing what's happening in Gaza, that reality isn't being shown. But, you know, I know you must be aware of the catastrophic death toll, that so many children have been killed. But as well as that, you know, the destruction of the medical system. Professor Debbie Sridhar at Edinburgh University thinks that a quarter of the population could die within a year on current trajectory just because of the collapse of the medical system, let alone anything else. There's thirst, the hunger. I mean, when you see that, what's your kind of thoughts? And do you think there's any way of how you feel about that? How can other people within Israeli society feel the same anguish that I would hope that you would feel about it?
Yeah, I've been seeing horrible videos and pictures and texts written about what's happening in Gaza as a part of the Israeli campaign there. I feel like the only way that we can really make other Israelis see what's happening here is is say that these people, most of these people, just want to live. They want to live. They want to live and let live, just like I believe most Israelis want to. But they have been corrupted by the system. They've been corrupted by the system to think that the only way that they can live and let live is by killing. And the Gaza sorry.
That's right.
And showing the humanity of the Gazan people and how these babies don't deserve to die, I believe in the end the humanity will come out.
But on that, just a few other things. This is, by the way, it's brilliant to hear because like your humanity really does shine through, which is something you should be very proud of. One of the kind of horrifying things that it's not just the atrocities committed against Palestinians, but it's videos by soldiers from the IDF uploaded to TikTok where they'll kind of gleefully go through possessions of Palestinian homes, laugh about them, joke about, blowing up homes, chant about Amalek from the scriptures and how there were no innocents or involved civilians in Gaza. And I suppose one of the reasons I was kind of shocked by that is if you're in a place where you're willing to just gleefully boast about it and then upload it to TikTok, what are you doing off camera? But I'm just wondering what you think about that mentality. How widespread is it, do you think? And what does that say about the way that the Israeli army functions?
Sadly, it is very widespread. Talking in prison to these soldiers, that some of them were in Gaza a couple weeks ago, the regular opinion, the center opinion is that we need to kill all of the Arabs in Israel, in Gaza, in the West Bank, all Arabs. It's sad. I mean, I see these videos too, and they sadden me, and I think it really shows how systems can corrupt humans.
So just to be clear, there, your sense was actually like the kind of centrist kind of view, the kind of the relatively moderate view amongst the soldiers you spoke to was actually to kill all Arabs.
Yes, I was told this exact sentence, that here in prison, the moderate view is to kill all Arabs. Um,
What do you think that says in terms of how the conduct of the Israeli army must be in Gaza itself, if that's the view that's seen as the moderate view?
I think with all this talk about how there are no civilians and how no one is innocent, is bringing to this huge death toll that we're seeing. And also it's hitting back against Israeli society because we're seeing a huge amount of soldiers dying from IDF fire and also hostages dying from IDF fire. So not only, I mean, to stop the massacre of the Palestinian people, and also to stop more and more pain to Israeli families, I think we need to stop with this mentality.
So just on that, I suppose what you've just made there is such an important point, which is about the rhetoric from the top, where you hear Israeli ministers saying there are no innocents, no involved people in Gaza, talking about all but Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza being Nazis, that kind of thing. Do you think that there was a direct link between the rhetoric deployed by ministers at the top and what soldiers therefore see as acceptable?
Yes, I think people think that until now, the strategy of siege and also occupation in the West Bank has failed. I think everyone recognizes that. And what a lot of these people are trying to pull the public opinion to, the strategy has failed. Now we need to kill them all because it wasn't enough to put them under siege. What we're trying to say is, yes, the strategy has failed, but we don't need to kill them all. We need the only way forward is to give them freedom.
I guess what worries me, I mean, that it's a lot, this, isn't it? If that is such an entrenched view, where you got to the point where soldiers basically think mass extermination of the Palestinian people is the way forward, then what hope do you think? How could the incredibly courageous, and I think everyone now listening really can hear just how courageous you actually are. How can that win, do you think? How is that? Because that's such an extreme view. I mean, it's a genocidal mentality, isn't it? How do you think it's possible to kind of win over that with that kind of approach, which is clearly the right approach, but against such an extreme view, how could it succeed?
I think I'll always stay hopeful. With every person that I hear that I've talked to and now doesn't want to join the army, I become more and more hopeful. It's the little things, it's the little steps that we can get, and yeah, I don't think we can lose hope.
And just a couple of final points on that, because I always like to end on a hopeful note, which is difficult given the world in which we live. And we have to work with the material that we've got, but there is always hope, and you're an example of that. So, yeah, I'm just wondering, in your generation, because one of the things that sometimes worried me is, if I think about Britain or the United States, younger people are just a lot more progressive than older people. And I saw a video in Israel with a school teacher who had shared an article from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, which I think was just basically a moderate kind of peace-orientated article. And it looked like he was going to get lynched by his students. It was just like hundreds of school students. I was kind of shocked by it. So, but is that a kind of, have younger people become even more militaristic and hardline, or are there younger people like yourself who see things differently that we can be hopeful about?
Yeah, in the US or in Europe, I think the child is going to be more progressive than their parent. And here it's looking like the young people my age are more right-wing and more fascist than their parents. I don't have anything. I hope that they grow and they realize that there's another way.
And just finally on that, I did see what I was very inspired by was there was a protest yesterday in Tel Aviv where thousands took to the streets, and that included Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel marching together. And obviously the only way we'll get a peace is an acceptance that the land belongs to both Jews and Palestinians, and there has to be an acceptance that of a shared future. And you could see it on those streets. That's what those people believed. Do you see that peace movement? Do you see that there is prospects of that growing? Because we've seen throughout history, people like yourself are isolated at the time, but who's going to get the better judgment from history? So do you see that and think, well, actually, there are seeds here which are growing, and maybe you've seen that from the response to you because you've taken a high-profile position. So you must be in a position where you do, as well as probably a lot of bad responses, you must be hearing from people in Israeli society who feel emboldened by the stance you've taken.
Yes, I've gotten a lot of hate, but also a lot of support, not just from the international community, but also from people in Israel. Like I said before, I think the catastrophe that was October 7th kind of left this vacuum of who is going to present the better alternative to what was happening. And a lot of people went to the right wing's idea of genocide and massacre. But I feel like a lot of people are also now starting to realize that maybe it's not the way, and maybe there is another way of living together. And that's what we saw yesterday with this, with the protest.
Well, I'll say, Tal, I am in awe of you. And I think what you've done is shown leadership. I think your leadership skills really, I think, come across in the interview. You've got wisdom beyond your years, if you don't mind me saying. And I think always the judgment of history, I think, is it's something I think about a lot. And I know it's not automatic. It's not as though always, there's always this sense of, is history written by the victors? It's often more complicated than that. But throughout history, people like yourself do take very courageous stances, which at the time feels often quite lonely and difficult. But I do hope you know that all around the world, huge numbers of people are in awe of what you've done. I hope you'll read through the comments on the video when it's posted. And I think you'll see a lot of love and support for the inspiring thing you've done. And given the atmosphere in Israeli society, which you've set out very clearly in a way which people find quite scary, but it really does emphasize the courage of the stance you've taken. So I just want to say well done to you. And I know you're going to go back to prison, but I hope when you're there, you know that so many people are behind you and will be ready to stand by you in any way. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
For those watching or listening, please, as ever, share the video, press like, subscribe. But thanks so much, Tal.
Thank you.